Welcome to Coping with COVID-19, the daily visual podcast from Business in Vancouver. I'm Kirk LaPointe, BIB's publisher and editor-in-chief. We're into our fifth, maybe sixth week now of the most significant shutdown of our economy in memory to deal with the pandemic, of course. And at a local level, it's meant thousands of lost jobs, hundreds, perhaps thousands of even lost businesses that are threatened with insolvency at the very least. Not quite sure about their future, their operations for the foreseeable future. Anyway, a new study out today from the BC Chamber of Commerce and Business Council of British Columbia and Greater Vancouver Board of Trade shed some very worrisome light on this as well. 1 in 12 businesses told this survey that they simply won't reopen. That's not going to happen. And 2 in 5 really aren't certain whether they will. So we're likely weeks away still from a gradual reopening of our businesses. And I thought that one of the best people to talk to about what's happening on the ground and what we might be able to expect is Charles Gauthier. Charles runs the Downtown Vancouver Business Improvement Association. It's been a real ally of ours throughout all this and helping us understand what's been taking place in the community. Charles, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Kirk.
Let's start with what you're seeing, what you're hearing. In general, give us a bit of a status report on the downtown of the city.
Well, very much. It's deserted. The images are very disturbing, very worrisome for everyone involved, and certainly from a BIA perspective, we spend a lot of time trying to build places where people can gather and encouraging people to come downtown. And frankly, a lot of the work that we do as an organization is about supporting that and getting people to come to festivals and events, to frequent our businesses, and certainly, office tenants that are actually there during the day supporting those businesses, retailers, restaurants, personal services, businesses like barbershops. And so, we've never experienced anything like this before. Yeah. And I think, frankly, we're all scrambling within that short time period, 4 to 6 weeks, as to how can we help out as a business organization. I think to a large extent, we've been able to respond to that, but we certainly don't know how to respond to business concerns necessarily in terms of what's going to happen in the near future.
Yeah, I mean, there were so many shocks to the system, and I want to walk through some of them with you. But is there a surprise that stands out for you in the way that this is all shaken out?
Well, I might be stating the obvious, but I think just the sudden impact that this has had to the business community and how broad it is, and everyone's been impacted by it. I mean, here in the Lower Mainland, we've always talked about being prepared for an earthquake. No one ever told us, get prepared for a pandemic. Yeah. And I think it's caught a lot of us off guard.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, businesses have said, look, we're going to be taking some steps. We're going to be trying to work our way back and all that. And I want to get to that whole point. But when you take a look at what we see as a downtown, I was over on Granville Island on the weekend, and I could see as far down the road as possible and not see another individual, right? Is that the way that it's worked out for people that aren't in the downtown right now to know what it looks like?
Well, I have to be frank. I've been working from home now for 4 weeks.
Yeah.
And I'm relying on my team that is still downtown, going downtown. There's a very small number of them going to the office each and every day. And so I rely on them to tell me to a large extent what's going on. I made that decision primarily because I thought I might be more effective, more productive working from home during this crisis than actually seeing the boarded up windows or boarded up storefronts. And I think that would have got to me based on what I experienced during the 2011 Stanley Cup riots and how it extremely bothered me. So to some extent, even though emotion does play a big role in what we do and how we react, I wanted to somewhat detach myself from that. And I am being productive at home in terms of talking about solutions, meeting up on Zoom with my colleagues throughout North America and other downtown organizations, and just learning best practices on the fly, literally. What are they doing that we're not doing? and then to a large extent, validation of what we're doing and we're on the right track.
Is Vancouver in a better place than a lot of other cities?
I would think that from a public health perspective, I think BC's done a much better job. I think those images out of New York and Italy and other places, I mean, they scare me. I'm sure they scare a lot of people in what they're seeing in terms of makeshift morgues and all that comes along with it. I think we've been spared that, and I'm hoping that that will help us in a much quicker recovery going forward.
Yeah. When you talk about working from home, I wonder whether one of the things that we aren't thinking about yet is how many office workers actually just won't come back downtown as frequently. Maybe we'll think about working 1 or 2 days from home almost permanently, and not finding that their productivity will sag a bit. If that happens, though, isn't that like almost a double whammy on the businesses that are going to try to reopen and regenerate?
Yes, I think short term and midterm, I think we will see that happen. I think primarily because of the social distancing that's going to be required as well in office spaces. I know in our situation, we have people sharing spaces that are as small as 200 square feet, and they're not going to be able to achieve that 6-foot distance. So we're having internal discussions about how do we do that in the short term, and we may have a rotating schedule of who actually shows up in that particular space depending on the day of the week.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a lot of businesses, and I know some of the building owners have shared some of their materials with us in terms of how they're going to deal with this. I think maybe an upside of this is that maybe office tenants will look at having much larger office spaces going forward to perhaps deal with this if it's a recurring situation. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that that won't be the case. So we may see an actual increase in job space requirements going forward. But I think for the short term, I think to answer your question, I think yes, I think we might see a reduced workforce going back downtown, and that's further compounded by also transit services that we're going to see in the next we're seeing now, and we're going to likely see till the end of the calendar year.
Can you point us along here in what you are starting to expect over the next number of weeks? Because the province's chief health officer, Bonnie Henry, is being pretty clear now that there is going to be some resumption of activity by about mid-May. Without getting too far ahead of ourselves here, because we're still 3 or 4 weeks away from that, what would you expect would be the first signs, the first forms of activity that we would see into the downtown that we're not seeing today?
I think the return of office workers in a modified version, as I just discussed. One of my staff that is working in the office every day, she's saying that she's starting to see a little bit more activity in the downtown area in terms of people on the streets and people in the office buildings. So I think we'll see that first, and I think that then provides the opportunities for some of our retailers and for some of our restaurants to open up on a much more modified plan. Maybe it's 50% capacity in restaurants. And you remember we saw that for a couple of days just prior to St. Patrick's Day, where movie theaters, for example, were able to remain open, but they could only sell 50% of the seats in each of the theater spaces that they had. So I'm hoping what we'll see is kind of a reverse engineering or taking some steps back to how we all started this. So I think office workers going back to work on slightly modified schedule. And then we'll see the personal services starting to open up with some of those distancing requirements. We'll see lineups, I think, outside of those businesses. Restaurants, as you know, are already starting to talk about putting into place a plan in terms of how they're going to reopen with those social distancing requirements in place. So I'm hopeful that by mid-May, we'll start to see much more activity than what we're currently seeing in the downtown area.
Yeah. Have you already thought through, will it mean, you think, masks pretty well everywhere?
I think we will see people taking all those additional precautions. Again, some of the building owners and some of the materials that they're sending out to their tenants include things like more hand washing requirements, being more stringent that if employees even have any sign of not feeling well, they should not be coming to work. And yes, I think PPEs will be more commonplace than prior to this all starting out.
Yeah. You spend a lot of your time, obviously, discussing situations with the municipality, with a lot of levels of government you're tied into, because you are really the largest of the business improvement associations that we have. Generally speaking, what kind of grade are businesses giving how the governments have handled the crisis so far?
I think they would describe it, rather than a grade, I think they would describe it as that they've made some very incremental progress, good progress. But certainly what we're hearing from some of our members and from some of my other colleagues in Vancouver running BIAs is that, loans are not necessarily the best for all of our businesses. If there were grants, a more forgivable portion of those loans, that would be much more preferable than what's currently being offered. And I think what we've seen with the federal government is that they've been tinkering with their programs as they've been moving along. And so we're hopeful that they could increase the portion of forgivable loan from 25% to a higher percentage going forward.
Yeah, the municipality has had, obviously its own distinct approach on this one. The province, the federal government. Have you seen enough alignment here around these various measures that there isn't a very big crack in any of them that people are sliding into? Or
I think the one thing that's still up for discussion is, what kind of commercial rent relief will be provided, and the details on that. As a BIA, we represent both building owners and tenants. And so, we have to find a solution that's going to work for both of them. It's going to be a win-win. And what I've heard from commercial building owners is that they've said, give the cash to the tenants and then put that onus and responsibility on them in terms of what they need to pay out. And obviously rent is going to be a component of that. They're not in favor of a program that we've seen in Nova Scotia where there's a guarantee to the rent to the building owner. They would prefer that it be simple. Give the tenant the cash, let the tenant decide what bills need to be paid.
Oh, interesting. I wonder, and this is projecting a little far down the road, but very clearly what that study today indicated was, 1 in 12, and who knows how many it'll eventually amount to, 1 in 10, 1 in 8, that just simply won't come back. I wonder whether, given that our governments have been extremely generous with, it is our money after all, but they've been generous with it. I wonder whether, you can already foresee the need out somewhat the other side of COVID-19 and the worst of it, some kind of program that is going to reattract business, because you could end up with a lot of missing teeth in the downtown as of September, October, November.
Yes, and I think that's where we start thinking about programs like how do we address the commercial vacancies that we're going to see at street level, because I think that's going to be kind of the canary in the coal mine to a large extent, right? And definitely in the past, we've received a lot of negative comments about vacancies that are concentrated in a small area. For example, on Granville Street, at one time we had a high in a 6-block area of about 30 vacancies. And it does have a negative impact. It obviously has an impact on people's perceptions of how safe that street is. It also has a negative impact on those businesses that are trying to operate if there are vacancies in their particular block. So I think that, I think the challenge will be, can we develop some programs to quickly get those street level vacancies occupied? And maybe it's just on a temporary basis. Maybe there is some kind of property tax relief that's provided to those building owners to incentivize getting something in that space. So I think the most visible vacancies are going to be the ones that we're going to have to address right away.
Because they go some distance, as you would know, to defining the identity not just a neighborhood, but a community.
They absolutely do. And, we could, without picking on any particular areas in the city, there are some areas that are really challenged and have had longstanding vacancies. And then we have other areas that, have done relatively well, up to recently. So they definitely do that. I mean, it has a negative impact in terms of attracting commercial office tenants to an area if there isn't any kind of street level commerce that's available. It has impacts on the kind of work that we do in terms of bringing people to those areas for festivals and events. So it does have a number of repercussions going forward. So I would absolutely agree that for us, that's going to be job one, is how do we address the vacancies on our commercial streets?
Because can you yet anticipate, Charles, any amenities that might be crucial to day-to-day commerce that might be missing when we come back out of this a little bit?
Yeah, restaurants, that are going to cater to the office tenants, office workers that are coming back. That is the appeal of the downtown, is that, we have, a good selection of restaurants. We have a good selection of retailers. And, we often hear from the commercial building owners that one of the main reasons that they're able to attract tenants to the downtown is because of our good transit system. If that particular infrastructure is not functioning well or subpar, it is going to have a negative impact on our ability to move forward.
Yeah, I wonder one other area, and that just has to do with the overall public spaces. I mean, very much the downtown Vancouver BIA was a supporter of what was created off the art gallery building and that kind of great public space and all that. Might we see those places just dry up for a time, where they're not the meeting places any longer, where we don't have the equivalent of a town square for some time?
Well, the one advantage of the Vancouver Art Gallery front plaza is that it is a large space, and we're looking at some opportunities that we can actually do some programming in there, but on a much smaller scale, respecting the social distancing requirements. But certainly all our festivals and events that would have taken place this year within the downtown that we were sponsoring, so things like the Jazz Festival, that's not going to happen. And that's
all those public free concerts, right?
Yeah, and that that was that was one of the tools in our toolkit to bring people downtown, is based on surveys that we've done in the past of Lower Mainland residents, is that other than work, one of the main reasons they come downtown is for entertainment. And that includes the free festivals and events, and includes the VSO, it includes what's happening at the Queenie Theatre. This pandemic has delivered a body blow to what's going to happen downtown, and it's going to have a ripple effect on the success of our retailers and our restaurants up until all those things start to come back together in some kind of assemblage of what it looked like before, maybe not to the same extent. So we are challenged in terms of how we're going to deliver our placemaking programs this year, and how we're actually going to bring people downtown if we don't have festivals and events happening.
Yeah, in looking also at the emotional trajectory we've been on here, right? We've been essentially shut down now for going on 6 weeks as a community, and I think expecting that probably another 2, 3, 4 weeks it'll feel this way too. When you take a look at the vibrancy of the downtown and how essential that is to basically our outlook around it, because it affects certainly the dynamic of the community. If you can't have these large gatherings, if you can't do these kinds of fun things in the community for large groups of people, where do you think we get the restoration of our emotional well-being from it? Any ideas?
Yeah, I'm not a psychologist.
Try to be one in a minute, though, if you can.
I think, one example that comes to mind is this mural project that we're doing with the Vancouver Mural Fest. I think that is having a positive, like art music, even if we have to do it virtually for a while.
Mhm.
I think that's going to be really critical to our mental health. Uh, the Zoom meetings and the virtual stuff is going to work for a while, but I think we're going to want to slowly reintroduce people in a safe way to coming back to the downtown and enjoying live events, but on a much smaller scale. So I'm talking to my team about how can we do, for example, I said earlier, what can we do on the front plaza of the Vancouver Art Gallery that's going to be safe and provide the social distancing that we're going to have to do for a while. And hopefully, in our case, we'll be able to activate some of our placemaking projects, like our laneway transformations that we were planning to do this year. And then people can come and enjoy that, by coming to tour those back lanes, but doing so at a safe distance.
Yeah.
But I agree with you; it's having an emotional toll on all of us, and it'll be interesting to see how long we're going to be able to tolerate the current measures that are in place before we all rebel
Yeah.
and start doing things, even though we know perhaps it's not in our best interest to do that.
That must be why we are starting to hear some things from authorities about relief being on the way around all these measures, because there must be an anticipation that we're all going to go squirrely otherwise.
Yeah, and it's our peak time of the year to be out there and enjoying public space, right? It's if we lose our summer, and we've already lost our festivals and events of large sizes, we're going to need something to be able to reconnect with people. And again, we're looking at what can we do on a small scale size going forward. And then we have, as you know, the restaurants are looking at that. We have retailers that are looking at how can they reopen and operate to the same extent that grocery stores and pharmacies are operating, by allowing a certain number of people in the stores and taking all those precautions. I think that these are going to be changes that we're going to have to live with to some extent for a duration of time.
Yeah. I mean, do you have a sense of what that duration looks like? Is it a year, do you think? A couple of years where we're just not going, our psyches will not necessarily trust that we're out of the woods yet?
Yeah, I don't want to hazard a guess of how long. I mean, my hope is that it's not beyond this calendar year.
Mhm.
I know for myself, some of the trips that I had booked, both personally and business wise, included international travel. Those are not going to happen for me. And I think it's just peace of mind. Like, why would I want to get stranded in another country and spend 2 weeks in isolation when I arrive to South Africa, as an example? That's not how I want to spend my vacation.
Yeah.
So I think I'm making some decisions right up until the end of the calendar year. I don't want to think beyond that at this point.
Yeah. Well, we may essentially get to really enjoy beautiful British Columbia in a way that we're almost compelled to.
Yes. I think there'll be a lot of BC vacations and maybe Canadawide vacations this year. And I know that the tourism and hospitality group that I'm working on and serving on is very much thinking about local, regional, provincial, national, international in a kind of a staged approach. They're not talking international for this calendar year, but certainly they're planning on local and regional for this summer and potentially nationwide in the fall.
Yeah. Well, let's keep in touch. Let's keep a bit of a status report from time to time on what's going on. We know we're a long way away from not talking about this for very much longer. It would be nice, though, to talk about some other things at some point.
Yes, and I think that I too am looking forward to having discussions about other than COVID-19. But I think it is changing and will change how we operate going forward.
Yeah. Charles, always good to talk to you. Thanks a lot for your help today.
Okay, thanks, Kirk.
Charles Gauthier runs the Downtown Vancouver Business Improvement Association. You've been watching Coping with COVID-19. I'm Kirk LaPointe. Thanks a lot for watching. We'll see you next time.